Hello, I'm Pat Wilson with Alton Wilson Publishing. We publish the Iowa Sportmaster software. In this tutorial, I want to discuss with you the qualified additional dependent deduction that's allowed by the child support guidelines. First, you need to know what is a qualified additional dependent. It is a child belonging to either of the parties, but not to both, to whom that party owes an obligation of support. The party having the obligation is allowed a deduction against their income for the obligation. So if we look at our example, and let's say we're doing a dissolution case, and we're representing Joe, and he and Mary, in this example, have 3 children, and Joe tells you, I have a child from a prior relationship. It's not Mary's child, but it's Joe's child. Is there any deduction I can take for that? All right, you have a couple of questions. One is, do you have an obligation to pay child support for that child? Is there a court order saying you are required to pay child support? If Joe says yes, then the question becomes, are you actually paying child support? How much are you paying? So if the prior court order says Joe's to pay $500 per month, but Joe's only been paying $300 per month, you can put $300 per month right here in this entry in the other deductions. If Joe's not paying anything, you can't put anything here, and you cannot claim a qualified additional dependent. So if there's a support order saying Joe must pay child support for that child, you can't use qualified additional dependent here. You must enter the support actually being paid right here as the deduction for Joe. If Joe actually has custody of that child, then he most likely doesn't have an order saying he must pay child support, in which case you would go here and give Joe the one qualified additional dependent. Now the same thing applies for Mary. If in your particular example you're representing Joe and Joe tells you, well, Mary's got a child from a prior relationship and that child was living with them, then the question is, does Mary have an obligation to pay child support? If she does not, then Mary is allowed to claim one qualified additional dependent here in the program. Now remember, you cannot claim both a qualified additional dependent and support actually being paid. You can't put both those in there. And it would behoove you to make sure that you take a look to see what happens by entering such a number. Let's just say in this particular example that Joe says, okay, I've got custody of a child from a prior relationship. Well, we know that Joe doesn't have an obligation to pay child support, but he has this qualified additional dependent. Take a look at the child support. I'm going to trick you here because this is a notch effect case, but Joe says, I've got a little child, a child that lives with me, and I don't have a support obligation, but let's give Joe a qualified additional dependent. Watch what it does to child support. It went from $725 up to $933. So this is a classic example here of where you have a notch effect case, and you're going to want to maybe seek a variance from the court. If we leave it at 0, and let's pull up our analysis page, let's just see if we get a warning. No unusual information was found. Why? Because there's such a substantial change. Entering that qualified additional dependent changes things so substantially that the program doesn't detect that you're going to be in a notch effect situation. So that drives up the child support. This is an example where you may want to take a look at the feature, the low income exemption feature in the program, and do an override of the calculations. Let's turn off the low income exemption, and you'll see that the child support should actually be $670. We'll turn it back on, $933. Then this is where you would do your wage output series and attempt to seek a variance from the court by allowing Joe to have the qualified additional dependent where it actually wouldn't punish him. Okay. Okay, now we're going to move to an example where we have a modification of support action, where in our example here, Joe has come in to see you, and Joe tells you that he's had a child support obligation of $1,000 per month, and with Mary here, and Joe has met a gal or gotten married, and he's got a new baby. So he comes in and he says, is there any way we can get my child support reduced? It's $1,000 per month I'm paying Mary, and I've got this new baby. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to run the numbers to see what the support would be. You do not enter a qualified additional dependent. You don't enter in a child support from prior order because these are the children he's actually paying the support for. So you run the numbers first. He said he's been paying $1,000 per month. In running the numbers, it shows that Joe's child support obligation would be $725.85. If it was $1,000 a month before, and now it's $725.85, then Joe has met the 10% threshold to seek a modification of the support amount. Once you've determined that the 10% threshold has been met, then you can go in and give Joe the qualified additional dependent and see what it does to the child support. Only if there's been a 10% change of child support, up or down, can you proceed with your modification action and then use the qualified additional dependent. The qualified additional dependent cannot be used to see if you meet the threshold 10%. Thank you. And if you have any questions, call us toll free 888-805-0363. Thank you.